I'm on the side. I'm good.
Well, I want to thank the community for coming out again. Can you hear me? Sorry, I don't have a pedestal here, so I'll just hold it. I don't have the names of all the ANC commissioners. I do know that our council.
Can you turn up?
Hello.
There you go. Sounds good.
That's my sexy voice. I'm sorry, there is at least one ANC commissioner here, but before I ask him to, because I don't have his name, although he introduced himself to me, our council member who I know has been working hard on this project, Tommy Wells, is here, and I thank you, Councilmember Wells, for being here. And the ANC commissioner from this ANC, Commissioner Garber is here. And I thank Commissioner Garber for being here. And once again, we want to thank the major actors for being here. This was not to be their meeting. But I asked, because this meeting was called to hear from the EPA. And I'll have something to say about that in a moment. But I want to begin by thanking the lead agency from the Federal Highway Administration, Michael Hicks for being here, from DDOT Faisal Hamid for being here, and once again the whole CSX crew for being here. Thank you very much for being here today. See this chair here? That's the chair for EPA. So you might say, where is EPA? Well, that's the question you ought to ask, and I hope you will help me do something about it. This is not a redo of what we have already done, where we have already heard from the other agencies, but it didn't seem that it was appropriate to have EPA here because the names of the other agencies might come up and CSX's name might come up, without having CSX here. So they were to be here, and as a courtesy, they have come as they have come whenever we have asked them to come, and as they came when you asked them to come for the mayor's meeting. Well, we did this, we expected the EPA here, and of course have been in touch with the EPA. As early as December the 19th, before we even had a date, we were in touch, my office was in touch, checking with the front office to see how to accommodate the Congresswoman's request. I will be back to you as soon as possible. It's the holidays now. The date was set for today, and there are emails back and forth from our offices. And some of those emails began to say they had, quote, concerns about the meeting. It didn't say they wouldn't be at the meeting, but they said they had concerns about the meeting. So I couldn't imagine what their concerns were. They were informed of the definite date on January the 8th. 2014, so they had no complaint about the date, but they raised concerns. When staff couldn't deal with those concerns, I called the regional administrator in Philadelphia and said, wait a minute, I can't imagine what your concerns are. The agencies of chief responsibility have come. EPA did what EPA by statute must do, simply rendered comments. We're not asking you to do anything but summarize those comments. They were very extensive, and when you really think about it, they may be the most important, because if in fact this happens, their comments are going to be central to what happens. having spoken at least 4 times with the regional administrator, I could not get from him what those concerns were. It is very hard to, when you're having trouble finding, you want to almost suggest, well, what is it, so you can help deal with his concerns. I wish I could tell you. Sometimes I'm able, as lawyers do, because you have to figure out what the other side really is thinking. I could sometimes suggest what their concern might be. They said only that this was the first time they had ever asked to come during a period of the draft EIS. I said, so? There's a first for everything. I said, I'll tell you something else. I bet you this is the first time that there's ever been a major railroad construction project in the backyard of a community. That's the first. So the notion that they haven't been asked to come was hardly impressive. As you might recall from our last meeting, I said I would go to see if there were other members who had had CSX or similar projects, because I thought that could inform us of how we might proceed and behave. And I found the only member that we knew of or could find where there had been a similar project. Except it turned out not to be a similar project. It turned out not to be in the midst of a great urban environment. It turned out not to be in anybody's neighborhood. So the member was very kind. He said, and you might imagine why not. It's not because CSX or any railroad, they're central to our economy. It's not as if they go searching to be located in big cities. It's where railroad yards usually are. They're in the outskirts of something. Or they're in the outskirts even of a rural area. This happens to be a case where the railroad was always located here, 100 years old, when this was an industrial area. So do understand what big cities are about. This entire area on M Street, this is the area I've been working on redeveloping, was an old-fashioned industrial area where much of the economy with the Navy Yard, where they really built ships and parts of ships were. And like any big city, especially one of this size, and you will see this in cities where the waterfronts are developing as well, cities develop even where there were once industrial sites. Now the industrial site, in this case, the railroad has to accommodate to the city, and perhaps the city has to accommodate to the railroad sites. Fact is, to the railroad. Some of you live and hear the railroad as it is now. The railroad runs all up and down close to this neighborhood and always has. And no one suggests that somehow it won't. And people know that when they move here. But I'll tell you one thing they don't expect is that there will be a major railroad project right in the midst of their neighborhood. So I can say to you, my anger is with EPA this afternoon. And I am not going to give up on EPA. I've had discussions, shall we say, above the head of EPA already, because I was so outraged and have never heard of an administrative agency, and I've been in the Congress more than 20 years, in a Republican or a Democratic administration, certainly not in my own administration, where they would not even come so that the community could hear about their comments. I said, look, if all they did was to come and summarize their comments, since you cannot expect the whole community to have sat here and read every comment, they would do a service to the community. The very least the community is entitled to is to be heard. So I am totally outraged, and I cannot give up on this. We're going to hear from the EPA one way or the other. They are central to what we are doing here. Let me tell you what I thought when nothing I could say, nothing I could do could get them out. I thought I would proceed in this way. First, I'm going to tell you what has happened since we've been in touch with Homeland Security. I have a meeting with the Railway Administration. Isn't that an interesting agency? You would think they would have been in the middle of this. I have a meeting coming up with them, and you may be aware that I wrote to my good friend, and he is that, Tom Petri, who is the chairman of the committee where I am ranking member, and I did so in early December and said to him that yes, I understood this was not a federal project, but the federal issues were obviously implicated. The Federal Highways, after all, was the lead agency, and so I asked him if he would have a oversight hearing. He declined to have an oversight hearing. I have not given up that at least after perhaps the EIS, and I will go to him again, because he is a very bipartisan, cooperative, very environmentally sensitive member of Congress, very much so, and will approach him again. But he declined to have it, and I don't have anything like the feeling toward him as I now have toward the EPA. I don't think he thought he could do anything at this point. He even said, Eleanor, is there some way that we can accommodate you? Can we call in the agencies? And I will sit down with them. And obviously he's trying to find a way to be helpful. I don't think that would be particularly useful to drag CSX and the agencies in to brief the chair before he decides to have a hearing. But if he decides, I would be very pleased, and I will continue to work on him. The NTSB is now heavily involved in railway safety, and that follows these horrific issues that have come from crude oil shipments in the United States recently. And I will be meeting with the NTSB. They are in the process themselves of engaging in what appears to be rulemaking. So what should we do? I could have called the meeting off, but I wasn't going to do that. They should have been here, and I needed to come here and tell you the story, and not simply put out a release saying that they won't be here. So I thought, well, what should we do? First, we should have the other agencies here, although it would be certainly unfair to make this their meeting. They were only here to comment in case they came up. It did seem to me that that the environmental concerns should be aired here today, because many of you are familiar with them. I did want to ask about the EIS, so I will ask our Federal Highways leader when he expects the EIS to come out. Yes. Do you have any idea? Have you set a date?
Well, we don't have a date, but we're reviewing the document, and we're in the process of making revisions to it. I can't give you a date when the document's going to be made public, but we are in the process of working to make it ready to be sent to the public.
Have you chosen an option?
Well, we can't discuss that prior to release of the final EIS. We can't discuss whether we've chosen an option.
Well, let me ask about the EIS process, because we're in the so-called draft EIS process. And here the EPA says to me, well, we've been never asked to come during the time there's a draft EIS. Well, isn't this the time? I mean, I really don't understand. When it's already done. The word draft means that you can now, make changes. So I have to make us understand this process. when the process is done, options been chosen. I understand that no one can know that at this point. What can the community do at that point if it desires changes? Would you please at least make us understand the process?
Does that mean it's a done deal and there's nothing anybody can do?
Well, this is, again, we've had this conversation, I think, at other meetings, but this is how the process works. We issued a draft. The public had an opportunity to comment on the various alternatives that were being considered in that draft document. That was done. And so what happens after that is that we determine at that point, we determine once the public has made their comments on the draft document, we incorporate those concerns, and the preferred is, at that point, we determine what a preferred alternative is once we consider the comments of the public and the agencies as well.
Can that draft document be supplemented in any way if concerns are then raised? Can there be a supplemental EIS? Can there be any document thereafter?
We only will supplement the EIS when we get new information. Information hasn't been considered in the draft. If something new comes up that has not been considered, but we don't have to actually supplement. I mean, again, your views have been incorporated in the determination of what the preferred alternative will be. We normally don't supplement until we get to a final and we determine that there's something that we hadn't considered. Then at that point we can supplement that with that new information.
How do you determine that?
Determine what?
That you need a supplemental?
I just said when there's information that hasn't
New
been
information.
Yeah, when there's new information that hasn't been considered, then we can supplement the document. We call that, we'll supplement it with that new information.
Well, you see, they've not done it yet. The EPA is not here. But that doesn't mean that the environmental concerns should not be heard. So I want to invite members of the community who want to speak to specific environmental, we're taking notes. We're not through with EPA, but you do have the agencies here, and I can think it could be nothing but helpful for them to simply say what their environmental concerns are, since that's exactly what you'd be hearing if the EPA was here. So I'm just asking you to say where you are. I'm not asking you to respond. I'm asking them to say what their concerns are.
Thank you, Representative Norton. Thank you for the explanation. I think the community really appreciates that. Thank you for being here today, and thank you for your wonderful comments. My name is James McPhillips, and I think the biggest environmental concern that many of us have at this point is the acknowledgement by the CSX officials over the previous weeks that there is highly flammable and very dangerous Bakken crude oil passing through the Virginia Avenue Tunnel. And we have seen over the last 6 months the devastating environmental consequences of this material. And we've seen it in Quebec, we've seen it in Aliceville, Alabama, we've seen it in Castleton, North Dakota, we've seen explosions. In Loch Megantic, there was a burning river of oil that engulfed the town. And they are carrying this stuff through Washington, D.C. They have said that they admitted that to us. There are other cases in New Brunswick where there were mixed trains of propane and crude that exploded. And right up our I-95 corridor in Philadelphia 5 days ago, a CSX train derailed on a bridge. It's still dangling off the bridge. And those cars are full of crude. And if that were to fall into the river or explode, then first responders are trying to prevent that from happening. Then we have a major loss of life, as the NTSB said yesterday or the day before in their recommended safety bulletin. There would be a major loss of life in an urban center. And that is the biggest concern we have about this crude. And so I think we need to hear more from the community, or from CSX and the agencies about what will happen when they conduct this project that increases the risk of that happening, because they're going to be running trains through an open trench very similar to this picture, and with construction debris, the highways right next door with hubcaps, something could derail a train. They're going to be piling, driving pylons that could increase vibration and derail a train. And this risk is not something I think DC should bear.
First, let me say, remember, I'm going to be meeting with NTSB and with Homeland Security, but I'd appreciate if CSX would say something about the train that derailed with what is alleged to be crude oil on it. And what you have to bear in mind is the train derailed. In other words, these trains are going through here right now. So my concern is not only during construction, where we see it and it can frighten us, but what are we going to do to make sure that if trains are going through here, that there's not some kind of explosion there? So would you all let us know something about that? After all, it was close by here. Would you let us know something about that, what you're doing about it, and why it occurred at all?
And can we find out how much crude is actually coming through DC?
She wants to know how much crude is coming through.
Yeah, thank you. My name's Keith Brinker. I'm Manager, Environmental Development and Construction for CSX. I can answer a lot of the questions that you've asked. The first question about the amount of crude tank cars that have passed through the district. I've got those statistics for 2013. There were 3 tank cars that went through the District of Columbia that contained crude oil.
That just means cars.
Just cars.
Just cars, no unit trains, just individual tank cars. So,
So if I could just ask, so last Thursday, your CEO, Michael Ward, CEO of CSX, said their biggest strategic goal for 2014 is to increase the shipment of crude oil through its rail system by 50%. So while quoting the 2013 numbers is helpful, and thank you for being transparent about that, but in 2014, you're planning to increase your crude by rail shipments, and so we're looking forward. Can you comment on that?
yes, looking forward, we don't expect the numbers to change for what has been shipped through the District of Columbia.
But you can't guarantee that.
Wait a minute, we're not about guarantees here. Why, are you making an effort not to ship crude oil through urban areas? Like, is what you're saying means that you're trying to minimize crude oil coming through an urban area like this?
It's going to the market.
No,
It's going to the market, but
The market's in Philadelphia and Albany, so there's nothing that's south of Philly that oil's being transported to. So it's coming from where it's drilled in the Balkan, which is in North Dakota, South Dakota. It's handed off to CSX in Chicago, and it's going to where the market is. And the market is in Philly and Albany. Those are where the refineries are. And so those are the directions that those trains move. In DC, we have rarely moved cars, and when we had to look at it, we had to go back and look through. There were over 7,000 trains that ran through the tunnel in 2013, and only 3 trains carried a single car of crude oil, which is, again, back to the rarity of crude oil moving through the tunnel. It didn't even register as a single percent. It was a zero.
I have a clarification question on that, though. So you're saying there will be no delivery, there will be no customers south of DC in 2013? 14.
The market is in Philly and Albany where the refineries are.
In
So the crude oil has to
2014.
move to a refinery to be refined, and that is the direction that the unit trains move.
You still have
I'm not aware of any new construction
We don't
oil
see foreseeable.
refineries.
refineries.
Right here, Yorkton Refinery. CSX is on it. Do you want this? Yorkton is south of DC.
Yes, it is.
Here.
Come on, guys, you have to work with us. Yeah, this is ridiculous. This is a waste and
They
embarrassment.
have permits for a facility, a crude by rail facility in Yorktown,
You already-
Virginia, which is south of us. And they're going to be transporting crude through their rail system through DC to Yorktown, which is south of us.
So what's your,
They're not
what do
being
you say about that?
transparent.
So a permit doesn't mean that they've been allowed to have a refinery. I mean, again, we haven't been approached about carrying anything south of DC. Again, the refineries are in Philadelphia and Albany, New York, that we provide service to.
Mr. Flippin, you have a permit for an exclusive relationship with this Yorktown facility that's owned by Plains All-American Pipeline, and they're planning to use that as a staging point to get the oil transported by you through DC to other refineries around the region. There may not be a refinery there, but the oil is going there. It's going to be repackaged and sent to refineries. And so that is our concern, is this Bakken crew that you are planning, that your CEO told investors last week that you're planning to increase your Bakken crew by 50% this year. And because the refineries you mentioned north of us are at capacity or close to it, the only logical explanation is that this oil is going to be coming through DC down to Yorktown with this new facility that you're planning to be an exclusive crude by rail shipment to.
So when we talk to our marketing group, they do have no plans to...
You guys please use the microphones because people back here can't hear you.
So our marketing group has no plans to ship any unit trains through the Virginia Avenue Tunnel at all. There are other routes that maybe they are considering.
Like for Atlanta?
There are other areas that they could move, but there is nothing moving through the Virginia Avenue Tunnel with unit trains, and that is what we said. That's what we're looking at for foreseeable future. Again, we've talked about it. It rarely moves through the tunnel today. So if I sit here and say we're not going to move any oil through the tunnel, then that's not
Why
accurate.
the urgency for the project?
The urgency for the project is to move intermodal that's growing in the market. We've talked about that numerous times. You've got a bottleneck in Washington, D.C. that prevents 2 trains from coming through the tunnel today. It was originally built for 2 trains. It had to go down to a single track. It has created a bottleneck in the district here. We see an increase in intermodal trains coming from the expansion of the Panama Canal. We already experienced that. We've seen a 10% growth year over year in intermodal. We have not seen it in general merchandise. We have seen it in intermodal. And so the thing here is we are trying to create a safer tunnel that is near the end of its life. It's over 110 years old, and we're trying to accommodate for the growth in intermodal traffic.
But Mr. Flipping, I appreciate what you're saying, but your CEO told your investors that your strategic plan for this coming year is to increase your crude by rail shipments by 50%. And that's the biggest, he said your coal shipments are drying up and you're going to replace it with crude by rail through the East Coast and through the Virginia Avenue Tunnel down to Yorktown.
He did not say Virginia Avenue Tunnel, and I can guarantee you.
I know he didn't say that, but he said he wanted to increase his rail shipments by 50%. The only logical explanation is that it will go through Washington, D.C. down to Yorktown.
Well, it's logical if you don't understand that there are refineries that just came online in Philadelphia, and that we've just signed contracts to move more oil into those refineries. That's where the oil is moving. I don't know what more I can say. Those are the 2 refineries
You
that's
have an
moving.
exclusive relationship with this Yorktown.
Look, all right, look. It doesn't seem to me, one thing it seems to me, let me make this clear. If you have a tunnel running through a city, the notion of transporting, having oil trains going under the ground of a big city is suicidal. So I am assuming if we can't stop that. If the NTSB is concerned about these derailments, which didn't even occur, some of them, right in the town, but flowed down into the town, the whole notion that you can ship more than maybe what they said, a couple of 3 cars, it seems to me would be inherently a public safety risk. Now, the question was, though, about the derailment that occurred near here. I think this gentleman was going to respond to that. What caused it? What did you do about it? What is to prevent it from occurring again? And what is to prevent it from occurring right here now, even before they start to build?
Thank you. Regarding the cause of the derailment, at this time, it's being investigated. I cannot speak.
So what happened? Tell us what happened. So you don't know the cause. Tell us what happened then.
train was coming on the railroad tracks, crossing, the wheels derailed off the tracks. Yes, it is on a bridge. There's an active emergency response that was immediately initiated. Similar response to the question is how would it be reacted to if a derailment of any type would occur in the district. CSX has a core of emergency response contractors, and we work with the local communities. We've worked with the emergency response agencies, is what was discussed last week. And we have meetings on a regular basis with the fire chief staff and Homeland Security staff. And so, you know, we would respond in a similar fashion. At Philadelphia, there was no tank car release of crude oil. It's you know, it's always, you know, a situation of having a derailment, you know, is the last thing that we want to occur on the railroad. But, you know, they do occur at times, and we have the emergency contractors on staff and ready to respond, and also in as what I said, working with the local community first responders.
All right, let's have more questions. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks everybody for being here. Ms. Norton, I'm really proud that you're a representative. I'm really proud that Tony Wells is our councilman. I'm really proud of the people in this room, our ANC commissioners. This is how democracy is supposed to work, okay? Railroads are good things. I mean, if you're comparing railroads to airlines or trucks, railroads do move a lot of freight, very economically. It's good for the country. But this is bigger than CSX. And last time we talked about benefits versus burdens. Now, there's a big burden to this community. That's why we're here. And the EPA statement is not going to be an on-off switch. There's going to be negative burdens to be borne by having a railroad. There's negative burdens to be borne by having what's there now, correct? So the question is, what is the new burden going to be? And then what are the new benefits are going to be? And how do you balance those off? And I haven't heard the federal government or the White House or the Congress saying this is a strategic interest to service the Panama Canal. If they do, we're all good citizens. We care about the national interest. But if this is something that can be fixed in another way, if the federal government says it's vital to national security to have railroad capacity to go north-south, well, there's more ways to do it than right underneath a very nice residential area. Why should this little community bear this burden for the entire country? So, I mean, again, just go back. It's benefits and burdens.
And really, that's what the EIS is all about. I don't think the community wants to raise the issue of whether this railroad, which is coming all the way from the south to the north, is in the national interest. That you don't want to get into, because we are talking about something that is per se in the national interest. If you want to know if you want to know the kinds of things that are happening, I got briefed on what is happening in Virginia. The railroad is only a part of this. The harbors, the ports, all up and down the East Coast are being totally dug up. This is all about trade. It's not about all of those communities are experiencing one thing or the other. Our interest is this. So don't take your mind off of what our interest is. I haven't heard of any of that happening in a city. Rest of that is happening all around cities. So special accommodation has to be made when it turns out your railroad runs through a city. Now, the reason I'm so angry that the EPA isn't here is their remarks were extremely extensive, and they went precisely to your point, burden and benefits. They say in their letter, they accept that there is a benefit to the country, and they give it a rating, which is not even their worst rating. As those of you who read it may remember, they said they were, quote, some that they call it environmental concerns, which is not the worst thing they say. In fact, they went on to say, we're not saying it shouldn't be built, but here there's concerns. But then the concerns were extremely extensive, and many of those concerns, what interested me about many of those concerns is that, and here's where the EPA's, let me get here, so, often when expressing a concern, they would say, for example, the draft EIAs, I'll give you an example of how they approach this, states that the duration and nature of vibrations will be determined during final design. Then it wants them to outline how this information will be conveyed to the public. Time and again, the EPA is concerned with whether the public will know anything. And it details often how the public is to know. If vibration impacts are not uniform, what is the range of potential vibration impacts based on distance? How was the 25-foot reference distance determined? Some of these were questions that were actually raised at our last meeting. And the EPA wants answers, and obviously people are going to be looking for this in the EIS, wants answers that really absolutely going to benefit and burden, want answers, they're not answers of just what you will do, but how will the public, and here that's much more important than how the public in Virginia will know. Many of them will not be anywhere close to where CSX is. It is how will the public, which will be, if this project occurs, right here in its lap, how will they know? And it is going to be a process the likes of which, if done right, has never been done before. Because it's going to mean constant communication, it seems to me.